It's human nature. It's almost the same as like that, the forgetfulness, the fact that we don't remember everything, that the trauma is not as potent because it can fade, it can numb, and the numbness comes from not being in the moment of the dramatic trauma and pain, and right, it slowly subdues because that helps us. In the same way of something that leads us to be prejudiced, we for very fundamental survival reasons in the being of who we are, we have to classify and identify things as danger, safety, happy, good, bad, right? And that's what leads us to become prejudiced, right? Because we end up putting someone or something into a category as opposed to treating it as a individual and unique. And so it's almost like the same thing. It's like, yeah, forgetting seems to be a bad thing and a negative thing, but it's critical, especially in getting over trauma. Similarly, we need to have identification, classification systems in order for us to navigate safely in the world. Unfortunately, that also leads us to becoming prejudiced and putting people in these little boxes and not letting, and not allowing, not recognizing that they don't exist there. They only exist there in our heads. Right?
So I have a theory. This is mine. The nature of intelligence is that we discern difference.
Right.
Wisdom is moving past it.
I like that. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Like that's kind of how I see it. I mean, I could be wrong, but that's, again, I don't know about you. I've been doing, like, I've done, you like me, you've done plenty of interviews, and the one thing I've recognized about most of the people I interview, they're not that different. Doesn't matter the background, doesn't matter there are some fundamental things that make people. Like I can talk about dad jokes, and I can talk about like parody videos with you all day long. But what makes you who you are is your heart and your compassion for people. That's what when I have ever talked to you, that is the one thing I've grabbed, that you tend to lean more towards that phase of your psyche, and I think that reflects in everything you do, good, bad, or indifferent. Like, that's you, right. And that's what you. But those traits and those things, no matter who I interview, they're there in various degrees. And so, I mean, the one thing I've learned, like, doing interviews like this is, honestly, it doesn't really matter where you come from. You're all fundamentally, I can find bridges from you to practically anybody. I think that's also a really cool thing.
Oh, that's an amazing thing. And you're right. I think you could take two people who fundamentally sit on opposite ends of a spectrum on a viewpoint, mm-hmm. Religion, politics, sexuality, anything where you think about black, white, on, off, up, down, left, right, any of those things, and I'm convinced, I believe we can find things about one another that are so similar, and that we can find a connection regardless of the initial. I'm sure you've seen, and again, you talked about commercials earlier. There was this amazing commercial, and I think it was Heineken. I don't know if you saw it, where they took these two people and they put them in a room and they interviewed them initially about, well, I don't like, transgender people, and I don't like, or whatever it was. I think it was something related to sexuality. It might have been a gay lesbian versus heterosexual and they didn't see eye to eye. They thought of themselves as opposite. They didn't know that about one another. And they put them in a room where the task was building a bar. They had to follow these instructions and build a bar together. And then when they built the bar, there was a key, they opened it up, and there was a cooler filled with a Heineken, and they shared the beer. And at the end of working together and building something together, they found commonalities in one another that we normally would not allow ourselves to see, because we're so focused on, as you said, the intellect allows us to see the differences and understand that there are differences. But it's the compassion that allows us to see the similarities. And I mean, it's just this, it's in my mind, that's one of the things that's often missing in a lot of conflict, is the ability to actually look at the person as a person, not as the other. So yeah.
It's an easier world when you can look at somebody as an enemy or somebody that sees things differently. And when you realize, like we talked earlier, like we briefly mentioned like conspiracy theories and all that other stuff earlier. It's easy to look at them as that, but
no, but yeah, let's look at them and say
no. But I mean, on the flip side, I mean, honestly, right? They're trying to make a positive difference in the world. I mean, they're doing it
because they care, right?
Yeah.
They care. Yeah, exactly.
They do.
They care. They love. They have feelings. They have fears.
Oh, absolutely. But I mean, essentially, they, in one very real sense, have the exact same goal. All right. I mean, the biggest difference, honestly, if you really look at them, is that they feel lied to. And the thing is, they're not wrong, right? At least on that part, they're not wrong, right? Now you can disagree with how they view the world, and you can disagree on the big overall scheme of things. But that fundamental thing is they want to make a difference, and they feel lied to. You understand that. If you understand that, and you can understand where they have a point, you can talk to them. It's not. Yeah. It's not hard.
Yeah, exactly, and that's why mockery is not really going to help. No. You understand that these people feel helpless, and they are looking for answers and solutions in order to help others. Right? Yeah. They fundamentally want to help people. They want to protect people from dangers that are either real or perceived. Yeah. In their minds, they're 100% real, and there's no changing that, right? Like in many ways. But the reality is they're not cruel, evil, malicious. Their intent is not to harm. Their intent comes from a good place. It comes from fear. It comes from helplessness, and it comes from wanting to help and wanting to take some control. And right, because we do. Typically when you're faced with something. Well, it's fight or flight, right? The two instincts.
Absolutely.
And the fight is, I'm going to fight by pitching in and helping, or I'm going to fight by helping people see that there's a better way, or whatever, right? Like there's many fights.
No, well, so for me, I looked at this time. It's like, this is why I've been very careful about what I say about like people in general in this time. Like I was watching early on in the pandemic about like articles being written about lower intelligence. It's like, no, that's not. I don't want to like ever push those narratives ever, because what you're doing is you're dividing and conquering. And so and I think also in a time like this too, it's easier to look around you and look for an enemy or something to fight. Mm-hmm. And there is no easy answer to fight. Sometimes the world, like, this is a normal part of the world, what we're going through right now. Like the fact that new viruses happen all the time. Yeah. All the time. It's a part of life. We have new, and there's a degree of, if they're really dangerous, there's a period in time where we stay away until the virus either evolves into something less dangerous, which happens actually in the grand scheme of things usually relatively quickly. Maybe a vaccine comes up, maybe it just fades away, maybe it, other treatment is found, something like that occurs. But until then, right, this is actually normal. But it's hard. You can't fight this. There's no magic bullet for this. Sometimes the world is, and this is the part where this is a hard truth. The world sometimes is an unfair place. Bad things happen to good people for no good reason. Life's inherently unfair. It's not also not always a bad thing either. Yeah. But that is the one side of the coin, is sometimes there is no answer. Sometimes you can do everything right and it's still bad things can happen.
Yep.
That's life.
Yeah.
Right? But that's a harder world to live in than, well, that guy's the bad guy.